So there's so many things to talk about here. One way into getting into this is just your policy with the Dallas Mavericks. Mm-hmm. This is your quote in September or October of 2021. If you work for me, I require my employees to be vaccinated unless there's a doctor's reasons where they can't be. Like you, I don't want my kids to be at risk. It is your choice. It's up to you, but there's consequences that come with that. In September, the Mavericks had a health and safety protocol where fans had to show they had proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. Do you still support mandating the COVID vaccine for your employees in October of 2021?
Oh yeah, I would do that again in a heartbeat.
You would do that now?
Oh, not now because there's no reason to do it now. But back then, okay. Absolutely.
But you do realize at that point, and my former podcast co-host, Jay Bhattacharya, who's now the head of the NIH, I first interviewed him in August or September of 2021. And already then, there was very clear epidemiological data coming from countries like Israel and Qatar, who introduced the vaccine a little bit earlier, that even vaccinated people were getting infected. And there was no clear disparity in unvaccinated versus vaccinated in terms of transmission and infection of the disease. It was very clear in September and October that there was no community benefit to getting the COVID vaccine. And this is not just Jay. This was Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, world-renowned epidemiologists. So to me, that
there's a whole lot of other people other than those guys who felt completely differently.
Okay, but those people turned out to be wrong. At that time, if you looked at COVID transmission and infection rates, there was not.
There's a couple things here, right? So when the vaccine first came out in December of 2000, it was a 95% vaccine efficacy, right?
Against symptomatic infection.
Yeah, against
that's what the data showed.
Right, against infection. 95% is pretty damn good, don't you think?
The original clinical trials showed that, but then as time went on, the data clearly showed the other way, that there was not a clear.
What happened was obviously the virus mutated, and we saw what happened there. And so then what we learned about the vaccine, and all the data supported this, is that people who were vaccinated were less likely to be hospitalized. Would you agree with that?
I would draw some clear caveats there, but yes, if you looked at the broad aggregate data, it did show that. But the problem is people who took the vaccine, and this is where we went over this over email. I don't know if you remembered, but have you heard of healthy vaccinee user bias? Where people on average who get vaccinated tend to be healthier, tend to have lower obesity rates, lower rates of smoking, tend to make better health choices, have greater access to high quality medical care.
Smarter is what you're saying?
Pardon?
They're smarter in how they live their lives?
I mean, there's a ton of socioeconomic factors as well.
Basically, what you're saying, I mean, the whole MAHA thing, right? They're more likely to be adherents of a MAHA type lifestyle, is what you're saying.
I mean, MAHA is a very particular kind of healthy. It's a very holistic.
But it's just do what's in the best interest of your own health. You live a healthier lifestyle, and these are all the things that you're saying, right?
Vaccinated, so just concrete examples. Vaccinated people tend to be more obese. They tend to have lower rates of smoking, tend to have greater access to medical care. And so we don't have to go into this deeply, but there was a very clear disparity in people who got the COVID vaccine and who didn't.
I could have swore you said when you first went through the list that they were all positives that were associated with the lifestyles of the people who got vaccinated.
Yes.
Because obesity would not be a positive.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So that's why I analogized it to MAHA because.
Yeah. Okay. MAHA is just a very specific kind of health consciousness, which I agree with.
Buddhist medicine, it's just like doing the steps that are in your best interest for your own personal health. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah.
But at the same time, even though they were, for whatever reasons, people who were vaccinated are less likely, and you agree with this, to be hospitalized or die.
Yes, but the vaccinated population is on baseline much healthier.
Okay, now that's fine, but I required people to be vaccinated. Maybe you could presume that the people who work for me had those better qualities, right? And better lifestyle, whatever it may be. But I wanted them to be vaccinated because they're my responsibility. And I really prefer my employees not be in the hospital, productivity-wise, but just personal interest in them. And I prefer them not to die. And I also know that 7% of the population is immunocompromised. And they don't wear stars on their shirts saying I'm immunocompromised. And there's a much greater percentage of people who have comorbidities that we don't know about, that aren't necessarily immunocompromised, that have had cancer or whatever. They don't qualify as immunocompromised, but they're at higher risk. And so we don't know about the grandparents, may just be old. We don't know about kids that, any of my employees who may be at greater risk for whatever reason. And so I made the decision then, and I would do it again. God help us that we don't go through this again, but I would do it again because my number one priority, nothing else. My number one priority was keep people out of the hospital and alive. And anything that had a high risk component, because remember, this isn't like a car running you over. That's not contagious. It's not slipping and falling on a knife. That's not contagious. It's not, somebody bringing in a gun, to work. That's horrific, tragic, but it's not contagious. And so because this disease was contagious, I viewed it differently than anything else. And because I don't know and I can't ask and I didn't want to ask which people, whether they were fans of the team or whether they were in the families of people who worked for me, it didn't matter to me. I wanted to keep them healthy, safe, out of the hospital and alive. That's all that mattered.
This episode is sponsored by Alchemy Elements. I've got to say, this stuff has become a staple in my mornings. I start every day with it in my smoothie or protein shake. It tastes amazing, but more importantly, it works. I feel sharper, more focused, more calm, have more energy throughout the day. Alchemy is packed with full spectrum mushrooms and adaptogenic extracts from plants like reishi mushrooms, cordyceps, lion's mane, shilajit, and more. Everything's third-party lab tested, which is really important to me because there are a lot of supplements and natural compounds and herbs available online, but they're not properly tested, and you can never be sure at times if it is safe and effective. In this case, everything's third-party lab tested, which is awesome, and the ingredients are all clean, powerful, and I'm sure you'll be able to feel the difference. Use code ILLUSION at checkout, and you'll save 10% on a one-time order or get 30% off your first subscription order, which comes with this beautiful ritual kit, a gold bottle, a gold spoon, and a gold handheld frother to mix it perfectly every time. Check it out. The link and the information is all in the description below. I highly recommend it. Yeah, the problem is, first of all, on the community benefit front, okay, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Koldorf, Tracy Beth Hogue, many world-renowned epidemiologists and scientists in this particular area, they realized by August, September, October, especially 2021, that there was no clear community benefit to COVID vaccination.
I don't care about community benefit. You didn't hear what I said.
No, you didn't know because you talked about grandparents who might be, you don't want to infect other people.
But that's just one line removed from the people that work for me.
Okay, yeah, okay, so let's talk about that then. Okay, so put aside the community benefit then, because there was not a community benefit in October. Initially, when the data came out from Pfizer and Moderna, it was like, 95% effective against symptomatic infection. Then it turned out that wanes in 2 to 3 months and goes down to zero.
So then you would agree that if everybody was pro-vaccine as of December 31st, 2020, and we had enough vaccines and everybody got vaccinated within that 3 month period before it wanes, or even after it wanes, right, within when it was still had some effectiveness, then we would never have had the number of deaths that we ended up having.
No, I'm not saying that because it's much more complicated than that.
Why? If it's 95% effective and you get everybody, getting that vaccine, then the numbers probably would say that the number of deaths and the number of people infected would drop dramatically, wouldn't it?
But the studies only looked at symptomatic infection. They didn't look at transmission, or they didn't look at mortality.
I'm just agreeing with you that, because that's what they proposed, and that's what the initial research said, that it had 95% vaccine effectiveness, right?
For symptomatic infection for a couple of months. That's it.
Right. No, I think it was more. I think what Pfizer and Moderna said, maybe not Pfizer, but Moderna said, if I remember reading it, that it prevented infection 95% of the time. Not just symptomatic infection, but prevented infection. In the initial
there's some questions around that, but okay, sure. All right, we can go with that.
Just math. If 100% of the people got the vaccine, only 5% would have the possibility of getting infected, and the likelihood of them getting infected when 95% of the other people don't have it and can't transmit it, the math would work, right? And we would not have had the number of deaths that we had. Would you agree?
Except for the vaccine showed the evidence was for symptomatic infection, potentially infection, but there's some questions around that. But when it comes to death and hospitalization, it's very different. And then we get into relative risk reduction.
No, I get it. I'm just saying, right? You said we'll agree that, and you said maybe there's some question, but we'll agree that it was 95% effective as a vaccine for transmission. And just math, basic math.
For infection.
Yeah,
for a couple of months.
Yeah, so basic math said within that window of a couple months, if everybody would have gotten vaccinated, nobody got bitched about it and said, let's do, what do they call it? When
my body, my choice.
No, natural immunity.
Natural immunity.
Yeah, nobody said a word about that. If everybody, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If everybody, 100% of people who could get vaccinated did get vaccinated within that 3-month period, COVID would have died in 3 months.
No, that's not clear at all. The virus mutated.
You agreed that was the fact.
I'm saying that's what the original clinical trials showed, a 95% efficacy on symptomatic infection. Problem is the virus mutated over time.
It didn't mutate within the first 3 months.
Yeah, whatever the time frame was.
That time frame matters.
Sure. Yeah.
We're doing math here. All we're doing is math, and we're saying we could have vaccinated 95% of the people, it would have been within that 3-month period before the effectiveness waned. COVID would have been gone in 3 to 6 months, right?
It wouldn't have been gone because the virus still would have mutated.
No, you would have got it. There would have been nobody to communicate it. There had been nobody to transmit it because they had all gotten the vaccine.
But other countries that had far higher vaccination rates, they still had community transmission.
Talking about within the first 3 months, though, the vaccine, that first vaccine before it mutated, that was designed for the alpha version. I don't remember all the names of them all. But they would have all captured them. If they would have had access to the vaccines, it would be gone.
Okay, but except for other countries that had far higher rates of vaccine uptake, the virus
also
still spread.
Timing that matters. It's not just higher vaccine uptake rates. It's absolute uptake. There's a big difference, right? Getting 60% of your population, okay. Getting 100%, which is what we're talking about here, 100% of everybody that could physically take it without consequences of taking it itself, right? COVID would be gone. Would have been gone in 3 months.
Your hypothetical is wrong on multiple counts. One is just the risk benefit analysis. First of all, it didn't make sense for everyone to get the COVID vaccine, and particularly the serious adverse event rates.
You can make it disappear in 3 months. Doesn't make sense.
Are you aware of the risk benefit profile?
Yes.
And so we went over this over email. So the COVID vaccines, the best available data we have is by Joseph Freeman and colleagues. Joseph Freeman is a top senior science advisor to Jay Bhattacharya now, and he co-authored a peer-reviewed study in the journal Vaccine on serious adverse events associated with the mRNA vaccines. Him and Sander Greenland from UCLA, John Kaplan from Stanford, world-renowned epidemiologists.
Notice that everybody that agrees with you, you call world-renowned. Everybody who doesn't, you have named.
Scientists who are sensible, okay?
There are plenty of the ones that agree with you are sensible, and the ones who don't are not?
It's the other way around. It's the ones that are talking sense. My position is only based on the best science, not on...
Nobody else is using good science, right?
If the vaccines had no issue of myocarditis, they didn't have as high of a serious adverse event rate as they did, which I'll get into in a second, then I would support it.
If you could have ended COVID in 3 months, because that was prior to the study showing the myocarditis, right? That was prior. No, you had some folks, because Pfizer had some issues on the single shot with younger kids, and so it would have had to have been Moderna, but so it's obviously a hypothetical, but COVID could have been gone if we didn't have the resistance that we had to the shot.
Again, other countries had much higher rates of vaccination early on, but like Israel.
They all got it either at the same time or later. And
Israel got it earlier.
Israel got it earlier?
As far as I remember, Israel had earlier
I don't think
vaccination.
so. I think they might have got at the same time, and they certainly tracked it better. But and they were the ones who showed that and again, I didn't prepare anything. I didn't look up anything.
Yeah.
I'm doing this all from memory. And they were the ones that said with their own with the insurance company that it prevented hospitalization, whatever the high percentage was, right?
Yeah. Israel did start earlier in December than the United States and Canada and other countries.
Math is the math, Rob. It's just a math question. If you have 95%,
your math is wrong.
No, if you have 95% effectiveness and it's equally distributed across the country to 100% of eligible people, it would be gone. That's the way vaccines work now. That's the way all vaccines work now.
You think we would have gotten zero COVID?
If 100% of the people, that's what the math says. Now, is it reasonable to think 100% of people would take it? No, that's just life. But if they had, if we would have seen a rash of support for the vaccine as opposed to opposition, and everybody would have got it, the first version before the first mutation, I think COVID would be gone.
But except the virus mutates and people still.
Like I said, we had access to it. Maybe we didn't have enough shots, but we had access to it prior to the mutations.
The studies only looked at symptomatic infection, okay? And just because you take the vaccine doesn't mean you can't get a future strain of COVID.
You're more of an expert. You can only transmit if you're symptomatic, right?
The different epidemiologists say different things, but in theory, you could be non-symptomatic and still transmit.
Okay. But again, when it's 95% efficacy
for symptomatic infection, that's what Pfizer and Moderna showed, not infection broadly.